Welcome back to Hashtag Lawyered, ladies and gentlemen. On today's episode, we're discussing what Grandma Susie Q down the road and the Queen of Pop herself have in common. That's right, the two of them can have a conservatorship or guardianship in common. Stay tuned to hear why guardianship, aka conservatorship, is not necessarily all it's cracked up to be according to the hashtag Free Britney movement. Welcome back to Hashtag Lawyered, everyone. You have Austin and Andrea here live and in studio, or if you're me, live over Skype. So, changing it up today.
Here to talk about Britney Spears, which is something I think you're probably going to know a lot more about than me, but I'm here to learn as well. So,
well, maybe, I fit the demographic, right? So fun fact about me, actually, the Britney Spears CD, when she did, I think it was like Baby Hit Me One More Time. That was my first ever CD.
Was that the first one she came out with?
This is going to make me a really bad fan. I think so. I'm not sure.
I mean, that's the first song I remember, but that doesn't mean much coming from me. So, who knows?
Yeah. Well, you are a guy, so it's excusable.
Well,
anyway.
Tell us a little bit about this, because I candidly, I read up on this. It's something I just learned about when Andrea brought it up to me. So I'm sorry, listeners, if y'all are disappointed in me not keeping up with those current events. But yeah, tell me what's going on here.
Such a heathen. My disappointment is profound. Anyway, so I'm sure y'all have heard of unless you're Austin, the hashtag Free Britney movement, which has been sweeping across social media, coming to an Instagram platform near you, on YouTube, TikToks, whatever. It's everywhere. Can't stop, won't stop. So what is this hashtag Free Britney, right? I mean, is the Queen of Pop in jail? No, she's not in jail, although her supporters may say otherwise. So what the hashtag Free Britney movement is a social media movement saying that Britney Spears, who has been put under a conservatorship in Texas, that's called a conservatorship in California, which is called a guardianship in Texas. She's been put under that since about October of 2008, shortly after she was put in a 5150 involuntary psychiatric hold at UCLA.
So let me just interrupt real quick, Andrea, because I want to know what happened to lead to that. And again, I'm ignorant, but what happened to that even coming into play?
So really, you don't know that?
I really don't.
Wow.
I mean, is this when she shaved her head? Is it that whole thing?
Yes, kind of. So everyone is I think very familiar about Britney having this complete mental breakdown where she at one point shaved her head. She was going shopping naked. She was acting apparently intoxicated in public, and she just had a complete meltdown. The most epic and iconic image of that is the shaving the head and wearing pink wig everywhere.
Okay, at least I knew that part. Give me that. I knew that part.
Well, good. I'm not so disappointed then. But anyway, so she had this mental breakdown in October of 2008, which is what led to her being put into what's called a 5150 psychiatric hold. And a 5150 psychiatric hold is just referring to the provision in the particular statute in California that authorizes an individual to put someone who's had, and I'm going to paraphrase here, this is not the legal terminology, some sort of severe mental breakdown or severe mental illness episode into an involuntary 72-hour psychiatric hold.
Okay.
So that they're not a danger to themselves or others. So that's what happened in October 2008, which kind of set this whole thing in motion.
Right. But then, I mean, and from reading through some of our pre-show research, I mean, she went back to work after that. She was still performing. Obviously, everybody knows about her shows in Vegas, what she's been doing there. And so after that, she went back to work, right?
Yeah. So I think what's important to note, right, and this is something that a lot of the people in the Free Britney movement, which, I can explain a little bit more in just a second, are complaining about. Like you said, she went back to work, and she's, in the past 12 years since her conservatorship under California law was begun in October of 2008. She's produced albums. She's been on I present her for the MTV VMAs. She's filmed a documentary, and she went back to work within a month. And so people are confused because when the conservatorship was established, it was billed as a temporary conservatorship. Okay, and people hear temporary and they're like, oh, so it's just going to expire, or it's going to be done within, like, I don't know, a few months.
Right.
Well, that was obviously false because the temporary conservatorship then turned into a permanent conservatorship, which is why it is still ongoing 12 years later.
Okay. Do we know anything about why it got turned into a permanent one? Did we ever hear anything about that?
Not necessarily. You would have to actually go in and look at the official court records. And since I am not licensed in the state of California, I wasn't able to log in and get the court records easily, unfortunately. But, if you're a California lawyer, the county is Los Angeles County Superior Court, so have fun.
Yeah. Well, and we could probably speculate. I mean, a lot of times, at least, down here, Andrea, with the cases we've seen, guardianship can be turned into a more permanent one if there are concerns that long-term, the same reasons that the initial guardianship were put in place need to stay in place so that these same concerns are addressed, that someone is having some mental issues, they're not able to make sound financial decisions for themselves, things like that. So I would assume that's some type of an argument for that was made here in this case, right?
Well, yes. And so that would be my assumption, because typically, while I don't practice primarily guardianship in Texas, conservatorship in California, while I don't practice primarily guardianship law, my husband does practice quite a bit of guardianship law. And after discussing this with him last night, he was telling me that typically what he sees with guardianship cases is that they're almost always turned from temporary to permanent.
Gotcha.
And it's unusual for a guardianship to be terminated.
Okay.
But it is possible.
Yeah. Well, and that makes sense, because if someone, you think about the reasons, and I know we're going to go into some more details later, but you think about the reasons for the guardianship, that makes sense why it's unusual for them to be terminated, because there's an extreme circumstance that causes them to come into existence anyways.
Yeah, typically quite the set of extreme circumstances. And I know we'll get into this a little bit later, but I'm going to take us back to the timeline really quick.
Yeah.
So like we discussed, there was the meltdown and the psych hold in October of 2008. She goes back to work a month later. And when the temporary guardianship was established, right? So when you establish, I keep calling it a guardianship. So because let me explain that really quick.
I think we can probably use both terms. I mean, it's a guardianship in
They're
Texas,
interchangeable.
Yeah. So I think our listeners we're probably fine with that, just to make sure they understand.
Okay.
I think we're good.
Great. So since I practice Texas law, I'm going to call it guardianship.
Yeah.
Anyway, so typically there is obviously a guardian appointed when there is a temporary guardianship established, right? And so Britney Spears' case, she had two guardians, right? So they're co-guardians that were established, and that was her dad, Jamie Spears, as well as an attorney, Andrew Wallet. So the next big drama, if you will, within the guardianship timeline is that in March of 2019, Mr. Wallet, the attorney, resigned as a co-guardian. And then a few months later, in September of 2019, the Queen of Pop's father resigned and asked to be temporarily relieved of his duties as a guardian. So that meant that Britney's care manager, Jody Montgomery, had to step in and be a guardian of the person. And we're going to go into guardian of the person and guardian of the estate in a little bit. And the last big issue that happened was actually very recently on July 22nd, right? So with guardianship, the court is supposed to have routine check-ins to make sure that the court is aware of the developments in the case, to check in on the status of the ward being the person who is under the guardianship. So here, Britney Spears. And just make sure everything is good, it's going fine. No, the guardian isn't jacking around with the ward's property. But the funny thing here is that since #FreeBritney has taken off, and I also think people sometimes are like a little bored and don't have anything better to do in quarantine.
I think that's part of, I was going to say, I think that's part of what fueled some of this, because we don't have a lot of other things to watch right now.
There's not a lot going on. And so the hearing, right? So Austin, as you know, most of our hearings, actually all of our hearings, I think, here in Dallas, have been over Zoom.
Right.
Okay. Well, So the judge, right? Court hearings are generally open to the public. The judge in Britney Spears' case had a docket. By the time a docket is like the list of cases that the judge goes through that day. And by the time the judge had gone through several cases, which were all public, and gotten to the Spears case, he told the public members or members of the public that were on the Zoom call to say, hey, y'all need to get off. This is a confidential hearing. And apparently, according to some sources, some of them got off, but then they jumped back on. And the judge was like, no, you really need to get off this call. They're like, no, hashtag free Britney. No. And so these like freaking dingbats, okay, and I call them dingbats because, and I'll tell you why in a second, stayed on. And so according to one source I was reading, they stayed on for 2 hours. Mm-hmm. And the judge, this poor judge, I feel so bad for him or her, was trying to just do his or her job and have the status conference for the Spears guardianship hearing. But these people wouldn't get off. So finally, the judge was like, okay, I'm just literally pulling the plug on the Zoom conference and we're rescheduling.
Yeah.
So they actually, I think, didn't make their point. They did the opposite. And they were like hurting Britney Spears because that was her opportunity for a judge to evaluate how she's doing physically and mentally and how her estate, right? So her businesses, her property, her liquid capital and stuff is doing. So now it had to be rescheduled for another time, and judges are really busy. So that was actually really stupid on the part of the Zoom Free Britney protesters.
Well, and I think that this is an opportunity. You know, we part of the reason we have this show is to educate our listeners on what you can do to help your cause. And this is a situation where, I assume that they were trying to protest that what was going on. I mean, protest is a loose word, but they're trying to use their influence, their presence, their voice to try and make something happen, and that was the wrong environment for that, because it actually, like you said, it's going to prolong the situation, and I don't think it's going to harm or hurt the case. I mean, the judge is going to make his or her determination based on the facts of what's going on. It's not like these protesters are going to change the outcome. But
no, not at all.
Yeah, but like getting on there and showing support that way is not. It doesn't work like the court of public opinion. You know, it's not like that at all when you're dealing with the rules that are going on in that hearing. Now, I would be curious, and we probably don't know the answer to this, but I wonder how those individuals got onto the Zoom call. You know, I know here in Dallas they broadcast our hearings on YouTube, but you can't actually enter the actual hearing itself. So that's interesting to me. I'm sure, or I wonder if they'll take some other precautions next time for this hearing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know how these people got the Zoom link, because here in Dallas, right, I've got a hearing on Friday, and the judge, well, really the administrator for the judge, will send you a link to the Zoom hearing, and to my knowledge, that link isn't published anywhere else. Right. So you have to get it via email, and if you don't, well, you better get it, otherwise you're not going to be in the hearing.
I don't know, maybe TMZ dug in there and found the link and sent it out, who knows, but maybe it's some people with some...
I have a lot of faith.
Yeah, right. So,
TMZ can get it done.
So at this point, we're waiting to hear when the new hearing is going to be, or maybe they may not even tell us at this point.
At this point, they may not. Who knows?
So, and let's dig into this a little bit. And Andrea, you did a great job really diving into this story. So, people are, in your words, they're freaking out about this situation. It sounds like they don't fully understand what the actual conservatorship, guardianship, either term you want to use for this, what it actually entails for Britney. So educate us a little bit about that.
Sure, about the actual guardianship or what people are freaking out about, i.e. Diet Prada.
Let's start there. That sounds more
with fun. Diet Prada?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So as you may or may not know, I love the name Diet Prada. It's an account on Instagram that
definitely never heard of it before, so I'm learning things as we go here.
Why am I so not surprised?
This is why we're a team.
Yeah, if you start quoting football statistics at me, I would probably just be like, what?
There you go.
I know. Anyway, so Diet Prada is an account on Instagram, and she did this very large multi-carousel slide post on Instagram about the Free Britney movement and what she, in her words, and I'm not exactly reading the quote, so this is maybe a loose paraphrase, but what she was saying is that this conservatorship on Britney Spears is a violation of her basic human rights, because Britney Spears cannot do a number of things that people who are not under a guardianship like you or me can do. And those things would be like drive a car, vote, get married, go shopping, go for a walk, get a Starbucks. And she's saying that this is basically implying that this is an evil institution, and the only time it should ever be used is for people who are really, really old, who have terrible dementia. And we need to free Britney because she's trapped and in a cage.
So my first question before we dive into what really happened is, do we have any idea where she got those conclusions about driving a car, voting, getting married? Did she have any kind of sources that she cited to, any kind of public news outlets or legal sources or anything like that?
I don't think she was actually citing to anything in her Instagram post. And if I did, I apologize to Diaprada, so feel free to fact check me there. But I was reading online, and I believe it was either the New York Post or the New York Times wrote an article sometime back that listed those things that Diaprada listed that Britney can't do without her dad's permission. Or in this case, now it would be Jody Montgomery if it comes to Britney's well-being. But if it comes to Britney's finances, it would be her dad's choice because her dad is still guardianship of the estate.
Yeah. Okay. And that's something that's a distinction that's important in this situation.
Super important.
And in a lot of situations. So as just to kind of break it down, the guardian of the person gets to make medical decisions, life decisions, those types of everyday decisions. But that's usually, well, not usually. Sometimes there can be one person that can help make those life decisions, make those caretaking decisions, and then somebody else that actually makes the financial decisions, right?
Absolutely. So here in Texas, especially, and I was discussing this with my husband last night, he said it's actually very common to have there be two guardians, a guardian of the person, okay, just doing like what you said, taking care of that person physically, making sure they bathe, that they're fed, that they receive appropriate medical care, physical exercise, and then there's a guardianship of the estate. And the estate is basically all of the property, both liquid and dynamic interests like businesses, and real estate, that the ward, Britney Spears, the person under the guardianship, has. And in Britney's case, at present, Jody Montgomery is the guardian of the person, so Britney's physical well-being. And then her dad, Jamie Spears, is the guardian of the estate. So he's the one who controls her purse strings. Gotcha.
Okay. And what would be some reasons you'd want to have two different people to take on those responsibilities?
Right. So Jody Montgomery is, from my understanding, right, an actual professional caregiver. So typically if you have someone, let's just give a hypothetical that's not the Queen of Pop. If we have, Grandma Susie Q. Grandma Susie Q has dementia and she's having a hard time feeding herself, clothing herself, bathing herself, so on and so forth. Oftentimes you want someone who can basically be a full-time live-in nanny for that person. And because that person has the experience and qualifications to help with the physical aspects of someone's well-being, that person is qualified to be the guardian of the person. But that person may not be qualified to be the guardian of the state, especially if Grandma Susie Q is the former, CEO of a multi-billion-dollar record label and has a fashion line, a perfume line, and a line of super posh boutique hotels around the world. Okay, that's probably a little outside the realm of a live-in nanny's ability to manage well. And so you want someone who has a good financial background and a good understanding of how to manage all those properties and all those interests for the best interest of the ward, because that person has special duties called fiduciary duties to the ward.
Yeah, and so that means they've got to operate on behalf of the person they're taking care of and do it according to their best interests, not what not what they think's good or bad, but it's what's in the best interest of the person that they're in charge of taking care of on the financial side for the financial guardian or for the person, the day-to-day caretaker.
Absolutely.
So we see this a lot, and you kind of touched on it. We see this a lot in situations with the elderly who maybe are suffering from dementia, and then we also see it with minors, right?
Yes. And so typically, that's a great point that you brought up. We see it with elderly and we see it with minors, and those are generally the two most common scenarios in which you will see a guardianship established. So, for example, with a minor, you'll see a guardianship established if, one example, you have Jane Doe, and Jane Doe is 16. She's involved in a horrific car crash, and she's in a coma. Well, then, because she's 18 or under 18, she's only 16, she's under what's called a legal disability. She's a minor. So she can't make decisions like filing a lawsuit. She needs an adult to do it on her behalf. So a guardian would be, you can have guardianship established, and then the guardian would be appointed for Jane Doe in the coma, who would then go and bring the lawsuit on Jane Doe's behalf.
Now,
so that's one example.
Yeah, well, and for sure, and maybe one thing that I think may confuse our listeners a little bit, let's assume the child in that circumstance, in that situation, has parents. Is there a guardianship necessary at that point, or how does that work?
Not so. At the end of the day, the guardian is considered the natural. Sorry, let me back that up. The parent is considered the natural guardian of the child, and so oftentimes, what will happen is that, say, mom will file as the next friend of or the guardian of, Jane Doe who's in the coma, and will start the lawsuit on her behalf.
Right. And then let's say in your same situation, you've got, say, both parents and the daughter were killed in a car accident.
Yeah.
At that point, you're going to need a guardian appointed by the court
Correct.
to take on the decision-making ability for, like you said, the legally incapacitated person. I mean, she's legally disabled person, because she's a child and she can't make those decisions on her own.
Exactly. And another situation where we find guardianship becoming a thing for minors is when, say, John Doe, he's 15 and both his parents die in like a skydiving accident. And so it's just him and grandpa. And then grandpa dies. Grandpa has this like humongous ranch out in West Texas worth like millions of dollars. And then when he dies, he wants to pass it on to John Doe. Well, John Doe is a minor, again, legally incapacitated because he's under 18 and can't actually legally own property. So in that situation, you could have a guardianship established where the guardian then has and like guards the estate for John Doe until he becomes 18 and can actually own the property outright.
Right. And then, we touched on this earlier, and we see this very often in our own lives, but just this is another one of the most common, is that the onset of dementia or Alzheimer's or any kind of other health issues that humans have, there's a guardianship that can be appointed basically for the same purposes that we just discussed, just at different stages in life.
Absolutely. And so something that I want to make really clear to our listeners, because a lot of people are probably listening to this and thinking, okay, well, Britney is not a minor. She's over 30 years old.
Right.
And some people say she has dementia, but, we're not doctors and we're not privy to her private medical health records. And so I think a lot of people are freaking out because they're saying, oh my gosh, she should not be under a guardianship. She has cries for help in her Instagram posts, right? So, I mean, what are some of those cries for help that you and I discussed earlier that she had in her posts?
Well, the yellow shirt thing was the main thing I saw.
Wasn't that crazy?
There was a discussion that some people said wear a yellow shirt if you're in trouble, and then the next post that she had, I think it was a TikTok video that ended up on Instagram, right? That she's wearing
Something
a yellow
like
shirt,
that.
and right. So her Free Britney followers are saying, "Look, it's right there. Like we got to do something. Like let's go." And
absolutely.
I mean, look. Everybody has their opinion, whatever. I think she's just pandering to the crowd. Like I think she's just trying to
be relevant.
Yeah, well, I mean, come on, it's a smart move that people are saying do this, and then she does it. Then all of a sudden, you've got more people paying attention, and all of a sudden, hey, look, we're in the spotlight. I don't think she's really in trouble or having any issues. I mean, come on.
Yeah, I think there probably would have been something would have come up in the 12 years of the court having multiple check-ins per year on her case if something was really wrong.
Yeah, well, and I know you're about to get into this, but like certain people that would be concerned about her well-being or her money, including her, I feel like they would have probably challenged these things and would challenge the guardianship itself. But you can't just get a guardianship by just showing up to court, right?
No, absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up because I do want to get into how difficult it is to actually get a guardianship. Okay. So again, I'm not licensed in the state of California, but guardianship in Texas is really similar to conservatorship in California. So in Texas, the state knows that it's a really, really, really big deal to take away someone's freedom and liberty and rights to manage their money as they wish and rights to raise their children as they wish. So if you want a guardianship for a ward, the person has to go to the state of Texas and petition the court to establish the guardianship. And it's this full-blown hearing and basically a trial to prove by clear and convincing evidence, right? So that is the standard in a guardianship trial, that by clear and convincing evidence, the ward needs to be under a guardianship because he or she is either physically or mentally or legally incapacitated, like we discussed earlier. And it's like a huge, huge issue. If it's contested, meaning someone on the other side is like, no, the ward does not need to be under a guardianship. She has capacity. She's with it. And the other person's like, no, she's incapacitated. It's hard. It's difficult because I'm telling y'all, clear and convincing evidence is literally the highest civil standard you can get. It's not as high as beyond a shadow of a doubt in a criminal court, but clear and convincing evidence is the highest civil standard. So Austin, do you want to explain what the normal civil standard is and why this is such a big deal?
Yeah, because the thing is, you've got, in normal civil cases, you've got to prove basically 51% versus 49%. You know, the jury judge can decide that you at least outweigh the other side's evidence by, I always use the 51-49 rule because it's easy for us to visualize that. Mm-hmm. And then somewhere between that and beyond a reasonable doubt, like you have in the criminal cases, is the clear and convincing evidence standard. And this is something we talk to juries about all the time, is that clear and convincing evidence is what you need to put a guardianship in place. It's also what you need in Texas to take away or terminate someone's parental rights with their children. And so it's a very high burden. It's not something that's used just for a simple you owe me money type of lawsuit or even a divorce case. It's something that's used for the most extreme circumstances where people's rights to parent are taken away, or their rights to make decisions about their own personal bodies and about their financial matters are taken away. And so totally different situation. It's a huge standard. And it often requires, you're not going to get there in front of a judge. You're not going to convince a judge without bringing in treating physicians, bringing in expert witnesses that can talk about the deterioration in the person's brain or the significant mental health issues they're dealing with. Because you can't just come in there and give the testimony of, let's just take Britney's case, her father and her father's lawyer or her mother. That's not going to get there. You've got to have the physician come in and say, look, here's what's going on. This is the studies I did. Here's what this is compared to other cases I've seen. And I'm an expert because I've been doing this for 20 years. And so listen to what I'm saying. And so it's not an easy thing to get. And it's not an easy thing to maintain. It's not an easy thing to defeat once it's put in place, because you had to prove so much to get there.
It's such a big hurdle. I mean, the amount of evidence that you need is rather astounding. So the state of Texas is very aware that this is a big deal. And if a guardianship is created, it is not entered into lightly. And so also what I would like to point out is not only is there so much evidence required for the guardianship to be granted, but oftentimes the court will appoint either a guardian or attorney ad litem to look after the ward. So we'll use the example of Susie Q, right? So Susie Q is 25 and she drowns, is resuscitated, and has severe permanent brain damage. Okay, if a guardianship is created for the brain damaged Susie Q, the court, and it's contested, the court will appoint either a guardian or an attorney ad litem. And that person's entire job is to look out for the interests of, the Susie Q who suffered the brain damage. And that her concern and her rights and her welfare are the most important thing to the guardian or attorney ad litem. And if the ad litem thinks that she's fine and she does not need to be under a guardianship, he or she will strenuously advocate against it. And the judges, at least in my experience in family court, give a lot of weight to what the ad litems say. I mean, what has been your experience with that, Austin?
It's been the same. And I think it's important to lay out the cast of characters here so it's clear. So you've got the attorney representing the person who's trying to get a guardianship put in place for the child. You've got an attorney representing the person who is opposing that guardianship for whatever reason. You've got the judge, obviously, and then you have this third party, what Andrea, you were just saying, an ad litem, whose job is to come in as a unbiased third party and assess the situation and then make their recommendation to the court as well. And the court's free to listen to it, free to not listen to it, but because they're coming in there not representing either of these parties that are fighting, there's more weight put to their opinion because you've got the situation with them being an unbiased person who's advocating on behalf of the child. And so that's, again, just another hurdle on top of the evidentiary burden that shows this is how tough it is to actually get a guardianship put in place. And these checks and balances are here to probably make sure that something like what people think is going on with the Free Britney movement doesn't actually occur, right?
Yes. So let's get into that. Okay. So what are some of the things, right, that people say are happening in the Free Britney movement, aka why her dad is apparently this horrible, evil person, according to these people, right?
Right.
Okay. So many people are saying that he's this horrible, evil person because he is not allowing her to actually touch her money. She's given an allowance, apparently, according to various news sources, of only $1,500 a month when she's worth millions, maybe more.
Right.
And so she is only allowed to spend $1,500 a month. And so she can't manage her money. So they're like, oh, she's terrible for that. And he's exploiting her because she's doing all this work and she's making all this money, yet she can only spend $1,500 a month. And so they're like, oh, that's evil. But I mean, Austin, what would you say to that based on our discussion of guardianship and the fact that her dad, to the best of our knowledge, is currently the guardian of Britney's estate?
Well, and I'm going to make a few assumptions here. I would assume that she's allowed to spend. Let's just pretend that 1,500 figure is accurate and that it's true, just for purposes of this to make it easier. If that's the case,
hypothetical.
Right. Because otherwise, and we could argue about whether that figure is accurate or not all day.
Sure.
But let's assume it is. I doubt that 1,500 has anything to do with her living expenses, with her food and water, with her just typical health care. I'm sure that figure is probably just, okay, here's your allowance like you would give any, child, I guess. But
yeah,
if that decision's been made, well, then maybe that decision is supposed to be made that it's in the best interest of Britney to spend that much money and have everything else managed and taken care of so that she doesn't have to worry about it, because she may not be in a position to be able to actually manage those funds in a responsible manner.
Yeah, because and again, I have not reviewed her medical records because they are private. I am not a medical doctor. But if she is suffering from some sort of dementia or other mental illness that is causing her to be unable to manage her estate or her financial resources, then you don't want her going and blowing millions and millions of dollars in a scam, right? She would be, she could potentially be an easy victim for a scam artist or a con artist. And so she needs to be protected from that if she doesn't have the mental capacity and wherewithal to manage her money, which is probably one of the concerns that went into creating this guardianship for her.
Well, and let's just be practical for a second. I mean, we've talked before we went on air today. We talked about childhood stars and how they go through so much as children. And you think about, and unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know how you want to say it, neither you or I have gone through that, so I can't identify. But
I'm no Lindsay Lohan.
Right. But you look at it, and if they've had everything, all decisions made for them throughout their entire childhood, throughout their young adult and adult lives, they may not have the wherewithal to make those types of decisions. And that may be part of the reason this judge has kept the guardianship in place, because maybe this is just what she doesn't have the ability to make these decisions. She hasn't had to do it before. And so putting her in that position could actually be a detriment to her financial freedom and her future.
Especially if she has some sort of mental incapacity where she's not able to manage her finances. For example, I have no idea if she's bipolar, right? But my very layman's terms understanding with people who suffer from bipolar disorder is that they can go into depressive or manic states, right? And sometimes people who are in manic states, one of the things that they may do in that situation is, because they don't really have control over their brain or impulse control at that point, they could blow loads and loads and loads of money on unnecessary items like a car or real estate or jewelry or just things not even for them. And so then when they come back down from that manic episode, it's like, oh my gosh, what did I do? I wish I hadn't done that. And it's not their fault. I mean, they literally aren't in control of their brains at that time. But if that is something that would be a concern for Britney or any other ward, then it would be in her best interest to have someone watch out for her and limit how much she can spend so she doesn't, get herself in that situation.
Well, and this is another time where I go off on one of my tangents that I try to emphasize a lot, because one of the things that I want to really emphasize to our listeners is that you don't make decisions or form your opinions without knowing as much information about what's going on and about what the actual facts because then at that point you're not really sure what you're looking at. You're making an opinion based on incomplete facts, and that's not what we want our listeners to do. That's not what we want our society to do. And here's an example of people saying, well, Britney Spears should do this. They shouldn't have control over this way. Look, I'll just tell you, sitting here, even after the research that you've done, Andrea, I don't know enough about the court records, what evidence was put into the record to say, okay, well, this is what her mental state is. This is what the treating physicians say. This is what her mental health professional says. We don't know any of that. And so trying to make an opinion or interrupt a court proceeding on the basis of incomplete information, this is the kind of stuff that we want to try and stop in our society, because we want our society to be an educated electorate and an educated body so they can make opinions, inform opinions, and voice those opinions based on complete information. So I'll get off my soapbox on that. And we can go more in depth about what these other things that Diet Prada listed off. I mean, is she able to drive a car and vote? I mean, what does that look like under these rules?
Absolutely. Sure. So the overarching theme, right, going back to what you just said, which is we don't want to make any opinions or decisions until we know all of the facts in a situation, which would mean reading the court records. So we didn't have access to them. We weren't able to get them today. So we're just going to have to go off general rules. And generally, under Texas law, if someone is put into a guardianship, is it true or false that the guardian can say, hey, Ward, you cannot drive a car? That's actually true. And so, Austin, I'm just going to have you actually read this list of things that Diet Prada said Britney can't do without her dad's permission. And, well, I'll tell you.
You can tell us. Yeah, okay. So
I'll tell you if they're true or not.
For sure.
Under
So
general Texas guardianship law.
So under general Texas guardianship law, would she can Britney's dad tell her whether she can vote or not?
That's true.
Okay. And get married?
True.
Go shopping?
So that actually depends on your court order.
Okay.
And remember our discussion about Britney Spears getting an allowance of $1,500 a month?
Yes.
So the court order is going to say whether or not, how much control that the guardian of the estate has over how much money, or if the ward can spend any money. So that is something we would need to look at the court records for. But it could possibly be true.
Gotcha. Okay. Now go for a walk. That seems interesting.
Yeah. Okay. So theoretically in Texas, a court could say you need the guardian's permission, but I was talking with Spencer and he has never seen anything that specific. And as a general rule in these sorts of proceedings, a court is not going to make an order so specific, because when it does make an order so specific, how is it going to enforce that rule?
Right.
They're not going to make a rule that the court can't enforce. So probably that's not true.
Yeah. Well, and then I would assume going out to make a Starbucks run, probably not going to be in there because it's not specific or it's too specific, but potentially could because of the money. I mean, is that kind of what I'm understanding?
Yeah. So she could, 99% she could totally go to Starbucks, but whether she can buy a Starbucks, again, is going to depend on the order of, hey, how much money can she spend per month? Is she allowed to spend any money? Because dad holds the purse strings. So, but at the end of the day, based on what we've heard, that she gets $1,500 allowance, she's probably able to go get a Starbucks. That costs like, what, $5?
Yeah, depending on what you get. I mean, I don't know how many extra shots you're going to get put in there or whatever. That's up to you. Now,
I know I'm 70% caffeine.
There you go. Now, I've got two questions that I definitely want to ask you before we start wrapping up. One is, because this is really important to the Free Britney users or Free Britney followers, fans, whatever you want to call it, the regime. The regime. Who has the ability to actually go out there and try to challenge and bust up a guardianship?
Someone who actually has continuous contact and communication with the ward, in this case, Britney Spears. So that would be someone like her mom, someone who has an interest and is caring for her. So if Britney's mom is really like communicating with her and caring for her, it would be her mom, or maybe her sister or her brother if they're in constant communication. You know, Joe Schmo down the street who's like, I've loved Britney since I was 12 and she needs to be free. Okay, like, you know, dude, if you've never really actually communicated with her and consistently been with her throughout her life, like, you can sign a petition all day. It's probably not going to do anything because you don't really have the standing.
And so I'm glad you said that. So the petition that's been signed really doesn't mean anything at this point.
Yeah, it's pretty much diddly squat. Like, I've never seen something like that happen. Spencer's never seen something like that happen. And again, you would need to be a family member or someone who is very close to and in communication and caring of the ward to petition the court to terminate or change the guardianship.
Okay, so it's good for Instagram posts, not actually good to bust up a guardianship. Well noted.
Yeah.
Well noted. My second question, based on the evidence we talked about earlier, is the yellow shirt enough evidence to try and show that this guardianship should be busted up?
Nope. Good luck, guys. Try again next time.
Doesn't exactly fight off the medical records and all the other things that they would have had to put in place to actually put this guardianship in place. Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. So I guess really today, probably the big takeaways that we come up with is it's really hard to get a guardianship put in place, and there's a lot of hurdles to get there, and because it's such an extreme circumstance, and you can't just start an Instagram movement to try to break one up.
You know what? But I think this is really important for everyone listening to hear this. I think Britney Spears is fabulous. I wish her the best. I wish her all the goodness and happiness in the world and the health. But I also have faith that there are enough lawyers and doctors involved that the judge is receiving qualified opinions in this case, and that she's probably okay. So.
Well, we'll see how many yellow shirts she dons again, and what other information comes out of this. I will be interested to see when the next court hearing occurs and what comes out of it, if anything. But we'll definitely keep updating everybody and our listeners as we continue to go down this road on the Free Britney movement. On the Free Britney movement. That's right. It's an icon. Well, guys, thank you all for joining us again today. Make sure you follow us on Instagram at #lawyered. Go follow us on Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast. Leave a review. Apple Podcast. Exactly. Leave a rating. Subscribe to it. It just helps us keep delivering more content. If you guys have suggestions, feel free to contact. Andrea and I's Instagram handles are put up on the show on the YouTube link, and you can find us on Instagram as well. DM us. Let us know if there's some questions you have, if there's something you want to talk about. Go on there. Like I said, write a review, leave a rating, subscribe, so we can keep delivering this content to you as we continue to build this show. And y'all, if you like this episode, go onto the #lawyered account on Instagram, or Austin's or mine, and drop a few yellow hearts under our latest posts. Thank you so much for listening. All right, guys, we'll see y'all next time. Bye, y'all.